the light.
Look at that pink. I don't even know. I think I was like, oh, that's a really playful color.
Yeah,
like
it
would
that
be
color.
cool.
Yeah.
Like it would be nice to, like I always thought like, especially moving, it all started in the alley, right?
Yeah.
Where I was like, well, if I paint this like building pink, people are gonna notice,
Yeah.
you know.
That's
and
good.
so, and I've always kind of like thought like the psychology of like colors and, you know, like logo and this and that. And so I was like, well, like I want a color that's
pink
gonna
is one
be
that has
me.
a lot of energy.
Yes.
And it catches people's attention.
And it's
like
fun
orange
and it's playful
and,
and it's young and it's, you know, and so for me I was like, I think that is me. So then I was like, hey, it would be really cool to do it this color pink.
Yeah.
And so
it catches people's eye, and I think with the logo too.
Yeah.
I think probably for me, I'm always big on color.
Yeah.
And I think it comes to my art because I started in graphic design.
Oh.
So it started like that's what my degree was in.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
That's so freaking cool.
Yeah,
so that was like the whole entire thing where I was like, well, you know what? It would be really cool to get it like together like that.
Yeah.
You know? And then when the Facebook thing happened and I was like, whoa, there's a lot of pink on that like advertisement.
And it's funny because of how many, like if you look at like some of the dominant colors.
Yeah.
That are out there, like if you look on your apps, like blue is a huge one because it's supposed to be calming.
Yes.
And stuff, and it's like jarring. So that's why I like the pink.
Yeah.
I know. I noticed that like when you painted here, I was like, oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that was like the whole thing, and so
that's cool.
Now I'm like, well, I guess that's our color.
We're stuck with it.
I guess we're kind of like stuck with it, but I do feel like it's like a very feminine like color and I like that. I like the softness of it. I think I read somewhere like once like you like it when someone wears pink, you can't be mad at them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'll wear pink all the time. Don't be mad at me ever, you know.
Well, like the T-Mobile building. Have you been?
Yeah, you're never mad there.
It's like a bright pink for the longest time next to the freeway. It was pink. Like it was so cool.
They're probably like, yeah, if we all wear pink, no one's ever gonna be pissed off about their bill. No, they're still mad.
Yeah, they're still. It still sucks.
So you like went to school for graphic design?
Yeah, I mean, I went. It's funny. Long story short, like in high school, I just didn't like the normal high school thing. I just didn't feel challenged by some of this stuff. And it was like, all right. I mean, this was the 80s, so. And it was like, oh, okay, you need to go here. You need to do this college stuff. And I'm like, all right, whatever. I wasn't even sure. Only because of my parents. Like, you need to go to college. You got to get a degree. And I was like, I wasn't that big into it. And I literally took a year off after high school and went and did printing because I'd taken printing in high school.
Wow.
And part of when I was doing high school, we had a vocational center.
Yeah.
So you could take all these like learning classes, which I mean, honestly now, just the way stuff's changed and it's like, we need to focus more on that.
Yes.
Like real like skills of like, okay, things you're going to go out
Yes.
there. So yeah, I mean, I look at it because like me being 50 this year and like, okay, my whole career, the stuff I've fallen back on wasn't the freaking like prep classes and all that stuff. It was like, okay, the hard like learning. So yeah, when I was in that printing class, I had a really good instructor and she was like, oh, you have a really good creative eye.
Yeah.
And I've always been creative, like ever since I was little. I mean, my mom was always like, oh, you need to do something creative. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But, you know, I grew up and was like, oh, I don't know, I need to do this, this, and this. And yeah, so I went and I was in this printing class.
Yeah.
And so part of it was design. And so she started having me do more design stuff.
Fun.
So I kind of fell into it. And it was funny because I was like, oh, it was the first thing that I really, other than writing, like when I was a kid, I used to write all the time. I thought that was what I was going to do. Like, I'm going to write.
Yeah.
Because I was very big into writing. Like, I would write these stories. Like, I grew up in Vermont, in a very small town, like called Newberry, Vermont. Very small.
And look at you now.
But it was like this, like, place where we were lucky because we were right by, I realize now, you know, growing up, like we were lucky because we were by a major college, Dartmouth College.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of art and stuff there, but just our school itself, it was back in the day of like, oh, sports were the number one thing. You college prep, like you're going to go, and it's like, yeah, that's not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did printing and then I fell in love with design, and much to people in my small town, they were shocked is, I think it was between my sophomore and junior year.
Yeah.
I got this catalog. I heard about Parsons School of Design in New York City. So I got this catalog for a summer program, and people were blown away, but my parents let me go. I was 17 years old.
Wow.
And totally just like, yeah, you can go. So I went to New York City for the summer. But what was amazing is I was so in love with like graphic design, and the professor there was very old school. Like, it was still before computers. So it was like, you had to hand cut everything. And he's like, oh no, you have to do this stuff. And I've never been one. I realized now all these years later.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, I'm going to follow the rules. I'm more of like, really? No, fuck that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to do that. Like, why? Like, everybody's doing it. Like, when I was designing, like, it was back in the day of, you could do letterpress, like putting the letters, and I would always do them in the little casing thing. Like, I would do it sideways and different things, which my professor's like, teacher, she was like, oh, why did you do that? Like, she was challenged, like trying to find out what my process was. And now all these 30 years later, I still think of like, oh, okay, I still hold on to it. So that's how I started it. And then I went to Parsons, and I went for the summer, and it was amazing. It was like the most rewarding experience ever. And I really knew I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But then the professor was like, oh no, you have to do it this way. And I came back and I was like, nope, I don't want to do it. And my parents were like, what the heck? So I took a year off, and then I went back to New York City and did design. And then life happened, and I just kind of went back and started working. And didn't like do design. I ended up doing printing. So yeah, but I end up going in and doing design again. When my brother died, I was 25, and he died, and so I went back to school. I was like okay, your life goes by too fast, so just go back. And I did. I finally went and got my degree in graphic design. So,
wow. Yeah. That's so awesome.
That's how I started the whole creative process, I guess you would call it.
And you've always been creative as a kid.
Yeah. My mom had stuff oh, here's this. And I do. It's funny because when we were in, I think it was Tucson.
Yeah.
She brought out a bunch of my stuff, and there's a drawing that's painting, like a little painting.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I didn't even start painting, even picking up a paintbrush until 4 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, but she's like, oh, see, now she jokes about it. It's because I had it, so I have it framed, which I need to hang up in the studio.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's got my name. And I guess when I was little, I used to do this thing like a Q, I would do this circle with a line through it. Mom, that's for you.
Yeah.
She told me that. She's like, do you remember that? I'm like, no.
That's so cool. That's your signature.
So I was doing my mark making even then.
Already then, yeah. It's
so
funny because now everyone wants to leave some kind of little mark.
Brand. Yep.
Yeah.
And I guess I had it already.
Yeah. Yeah. You were like, I'm ahead of the game. But it's really I think that it kind of sucked that one of the teachers was like, no, you have to do it this way. And and I feel like a lot of that kind of stuff, with any kind of formal education, there's a lot of people that they're like, it has to be like this.
Very cookie cutter.
Yeah. In graphic design, any kind of design that you get into, it's art, you know what I mean? And so when you start to kind of put restrictions on it, then it's well, it doesn't become fun anymore.
And that was me. I went into it because I was like, okay, that for me, okay, I needed to look at how can I make a career and do something. Yeah. That's always been my brain. I've been very analytical and practical and okay, I need to do this. And there's the creative part too.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I need to do something that I can, make a career out of. And that professor at the time, it was somebody who came from LA. So it was okay, he's, for me, a little Vermont boy.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Los Angeles. No, he must know. And so he was oh, you need to do it this way. Now I realize that whole thing of oh, if you can go back and tell yourself something, I'm don't listen to that jerk.
Yeah.
He's an asshole.
Yeah. Dude, that happened to me when I was doing what is it? I was taking design, fashion design. So you had to draw stuff. Yeah. And I was like, wait, we're not making shit. I was I'm in the wrong class then. Yeah. So we had to draw, we had to scale up a picture. And so I've always kind of thought well, if I really put time into it, I could draw, and really do stuff like that. Well, I guess I put in too much effort into the eyes, so the eyes were very intense. She was giving you this intense stare.
Intense look.
And when I turned it in, the teacher, when you were turning it in, she was looking at it and giving you comments, Yeah. So I was looking around at the table, and I was like, well, mine looks really good compared to a lot of these. And so when I went up, she's like, these eyes are too, and I was like, and after that I was like, man, fuck this, I'm not going back to this damn class.
It's
but
so
I mean,
funny.
it sucks because it's like,
you do, and you're in a place where, like, especially that when you're impressionable age, and you're trying to learn. And for me too, it was like a lot of pressure. Like, okay, I was in New York City. I knew my parents had invested a lot to let me go there and do this, and it was like I had such a I don't know, like angst about it. Like, okay, I need to finish this out. But it was, for me, I finally was like, you know what, screw it. I'm here, and it was such a life-changing like experience of the fact of being somewhere like that. And then fast forwarding a few years, like I said, David died, and I was like, okay, I really need to. I was working in printing at the time, and I had a pretty good job for the fact that I had just a high school diploma at that time. Yeah. And I was like, nope, I'm done. And I just like quit my job, which I was completely like, what the hell am I doing? Quit my job and went back to school full time at 25.
Wow, that's awesome.
Which most people are like, what? Like, people are like, oh, you're going to do that? And, I finally did it. And then it was funny because I went, and it was a 4-year program, college, bachelor's degree. And when I got done that, I was so burned out that I was just like, okay, I don't want to do design. But then I moved to Seattle. Literally packed up my car and moved out. I had a friend who lived in Seattle, and my brother was in Portland. So that's how I ended up on the West Coast.
That's so cool.
So I was like, okay, because I'd come to visit him a couple of times. Like, oh, you should come out here, or you should, move to the West Coast. And I was like done with like Vermont. I had this like fear of like, okay, I'm going to be stuck here forever, because Vermont's kind of that place where people, I mean, I have an appreciation for it as a place now, but it was one of those places like you feel like, okay, if you don't move, you're going to be there forever. Like, never going to leave. I'm going to just be there forever.
You're like, I need to leave. I need to leave. Yeah.
So my friend Beth, she was in Seattle, and then my brother had moved to Portland. He was at law school. So I came out a couple of times, and I was working at the college because I was just so burned out on design. I was like, okay, I don't know if I want to do this. I'm not sure what I want to do. Yeah. But I had spent so much time like investing in it. So then I got to Seattle and just kind of was doing it for freelance, and then literally just finally walked away from like design as like trying to pursue it, because the thing they don't teach you in design school, kids, listen to this.
Yes, this is
pursue
important.
It, because it doesn't matter, because like in the beginning you're going to do a lot of crap for people, and my thing was I realized I didn't like commercial art because I liked the art of it, and I've only realized that recently when I've started doing painting and being creative, like really creative, because I got to painting because I would do stuff creatively, and I was like, Rich, my husband, was really supportive of me since we met 13 years ago. And so I got to painting because I was always like doing creative things. Like one thing I did a couple of years ago, everybody's like, oh my gosh, you need to do more stuff like this, is I needed to find an outlet because I was always just working. And so one year I was like, okay, screw it. We're here in San Diego, and I made this whole like Frida, like paper mache, like mask.
The head. Yes.
And I made the whole costume and everything, because I always like, just for Halloween, I love Halloween. I'm big into making it. And Rich was like, oh, why don't you need to do something more creative? And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Make Frida heads and sell them to people? What am I going to do? So that next year for Christmas, he got me a gift certificate to Art on 30th, a school up here, which we'd always driven by, and I'm like, oh, I should take a class there. So he kind of pushed me out of the nest, and he's like, I don't care what you do. You should take this and go invest in yourself and do something creative.
That's super sweet.
Yeah, and so I was like, I didn't want to do graphic design. And he was like, well, you don't have to do design. Just do something. Like, it's creative. And it was funny because I got that in December, and I kind of waffled like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. So I finally was like, you know what? I've never done abstract art. I've never like picked up in my entire like, now it's funny because all of my life creatively, I've never like ever gravitated towards painting, which I have some really good friends who are really good painters and artists. And I think for me, I'd always been more of commercial art. Like, okay, I did that. And then I kind of in my own brain separated commercial art, like graphic design. And that was where my skill set lied with this other creative stuff. And I've always had really creative friends my entire life. And I'm like, oh, that's really good. Like, and admired it. But never thought, oh, I could do that. And then I went and did abstract because I'm like, okay, I'll throw some paint around. What the hell?
Yeah, like have fun.
Have fun. Yeah. And I did, and that was like a total like cathartic release for me, because I have a job. My full-time job is a lot of stress sometimes and just like heads down, and I'm very much a workaholic.
Yeah.
And finally I was like, okay, I had a place where I'm going to go and do something, and I started just taking the classes, and then I was like, you know what, really started investing in it. Like we had a set of class, and I took it, I think it was the first session was like 3 months.
Yeah.
So I took that, and then I kind of stopped, and then I reinvested, took the class again through Art on 30th. So I kind of took it for a whole year. I just made myself do it.
Nice.
And it kind of unlocked something of like, okay, this is fun. It was a release.
Yeah.
So then it's funny because I just remodeled, like moved stuff around in my studio, but I had the original. I went to Walmart or Target, I can't remember, and I bought a little folding table. That was my big art investment. And I like set up my studio in my yard, because that was always my thing. I realized I always had like a reason, like, oh, I don't have a space, I can't do it. And it's like when you find that passion or that drive, and plus I think, like we were talking about before we started this, so like you get to that age of like you're starting like, damn, life goes by really fast. Like I was just telling you, like I'm like, okay, I'm 50, and I think 30 years ago I graduated, 30 something, we'll just leave it at that, high school, and then 30 something years from now I'm going to be 80, and it's like, okay, you don't have another chance.
No, yeah.
Like,
and I think like a lot of people, like what we were talking about, like they woke up and they're like, well, it's like now or like never. Like time is going to go by so freaking fast, and then what's going to end up happening, like you're just going to end up like thinking like, well, what if I would have done that, or what if, and so like I've always had like that mentality of like do it and just what's the worst that could happen.
Try it and see what happens.
Just do it. And like I don't know, like maybe like the naiveness of like nothing bad could happen if you start a business, you know. And then a lot of people are like, what if you fail, but it's like it is really like surrounding yourself with like those art friends and like people that inspire you, that were like willing to be like, go for it. And like I feel with like art, there's so many different kind of like styles. There's
so many styles and so many mediums that you can try, and I think people easily, and I know me, I got stuck in that, like, oh, okay, you need to step out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
And that was it for me. It was like really trying to step out of that comfort zone. It's like, and when I did fully, and having people that really support you, like I would post stuff on Facebook and be like, people like, oh, that's great, you should do more of it. I'm like, okay, well, where am I going to do it? What am I going to, what am I going to do it for? And it was always like, okay, here's the chance. And then I was telling you earlier today, like when COVID happened, it was like, okay, I was at home a lot more like the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I had been I always used to spend time in Barrio Logan since I've lived here. Because I mean, when I lived in Tucson, I had a friend, he was a big foodie, and he told me, like, he found out we were moving to San Diego.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, do you know a saloon? And I'm like, no, because I, been here as a tourist.
Yeah.
And so since I moved here 6 years ago, I always came down here.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a cool discovery because I was like, oh, this is a great, like, area, and it was so full of like all the arts we used to come before COVID, all the galleries and stuff. So it's one of those, like, when I started doing art, I was like manifested, like, you know what, I want to be down in this. And so a good friend of mine and I, we'd always come down here to all the openings and everything, and I joked, I'm like, you know what, I need to have a gallery, not a gallery, but a studio here someday. Like, never thinking, and this was before I was doing art, like I don't know what I need to do, and it's like manifesting that. But coming down here last year, it was happenstance that worked because like they had an opening at the art hub, and I was like, no, I really don't need to do it. And I did, and it's probably the best thing because every day I'm down here, I'm surrounded by people who are like, very inspiring.
Yeah.
And just they're following their passion. Like they're doing it every day. So it kind of helps motivate, like, okay, stop doing it in your yard. You may be able to do something.
Yes. Yeah. And it's awesome because it's like you have awesome neighbors there too. Yeah. But it's like I've always liked the feeling of seeing your neighbor, and I'm like, what are you up to? And then you're like, I'm working on like this painting that's gonna be hung up at this place, and then do this, or just I'm working on this painting that has a lot of this and this and so just the whole idea that people had stuff going on all the time, to me I was like, I'm with my people. Like you get it, like I have shit going on too, so it's like that was like, oh my God, there's that like creative energy constantly flowing.
Inspiring too.
Yes.
It's like people are doing what they love and they're making it happen. And that's been like the big thing for me this last year is like, oh, okay, instead of just doing this for fun, like for me, like everybody's like, oh, you need to put a website up. And for me, it was a conscious thing in the beginning of like, no, I'm just doing this because I would post some stuff on Facebook and then people would reach out to me. And then it's funny because my Instagram for a long time was just for me and like, personal stuff. And I just started dipping my toes into like putting my art out there a couple of years ago. Yeah. And it was kind of crazy because I'm like, oh, I just do it. Like a lot of my paintings I just would make and I was giving them away. Yeah. And somebody was like, and it was funny because I guess I was at that point of like never thinking like, oh, somebody actually might want to buy this. Yeah. And just some random stranger like text me and was like, oh, I'd love to buy your painting. And the funny thing was one that I was like, that was personal. Like it was one I made for me. Yeah. Like I made it and I'm like, oh, okay. And Rich is like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you sell it? I'm like, well, I don't know. I never thought of it as something to sell. Yeah. I just thought of it as,
therapeutic and
art therapy really like okay, throw some paint around and have fun. And I had a really good instructor at Art in 30th and she was great and like this is what I did and how I've got there, and so I have that inspiration from other people.
That's like, so cool.
How to make it into something bigger than what it is.
So now do you like sell the paintings or are you still kind of like
dip my toes in? Like it's funny, I have a commission that a friend of mine's like, oh, I want you to do it. So I've been working on that. And I kind of put it back burner when I moved the studio space. This week I'm off from my day job. Yes. So like, all right, one of my things is, okay, creating like inventory, like enough art to actually sell, to have out there. Cause like I'll do something.
That is awesome.
Like, oh, okay, I'm bored and I'll make something new. But to really, start doing something that, okay, I could sell this and give it, people, there's an audience for it. And it's funny because I'll post stuff and I started like when I started the space, when I first had the space here, it was one of the little tiny ones. And then when Chris expanded the building this year, I had told him like, oh, I'd love a bigger space. So where I moved, and then people were like, oh, you have a bigger space, you should have a gallery space. I'm like, okay, that's a good idea. And I had an open studio a few months ago, which was fun, and I was shocked. It was shocking to me because I didn't really do any work and I didn't advertise it. I was just like, oh, okay. And I kind of put it out there and I was blown away like how many people actually came through and were like, oh, I follow you on Instagram. Like, what? Like, okay, those, people are actually people.
People are actually like looking at my stuff.
It was kind of surreal moment of like, oh, okay. And then people like wanting to. So kind of like in that space of like, okay, I need to take it to that next level. And that's where when I moved spaces and people were like, oh, well, is it just Michael Woodward art? I wanted to create something now where I could have something that I can build off of. So that's where, to like homage of my original studio space, I created the 8x8 studio, which is for me. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
To kind of give it a brand, like, okay, that's a space, because I wanted it to be just more than, oh, Michael creates art, but like somewhere like, if I create stuff and like a creative home for everything that I do. So like that's design awesome. And so it's kind of funny. I've kind of gone full circle of like, okay, doing painting, of like looking more at like design again, which always has helped me like with the colors. Yeah. And like, layout and stuff. It's funny, all that stuff that you learn that you think you just kind of tabled and will never use again. It's like, oh yeah, no, I need to do that because that person looks this way, and this is what somebody's looking at when they're looking at a painting, and this is the colors that draw somebody in. Like we were talking about the pink color for Loka.
Yes.
So
it's all like the psychology behind the colors and this and that. But dude, I love, like when I started like following you and doing all that kind of stuff, I was like, whoa, this looks really cool. Cause you were doing a lot of the collaging stuff. Yep. Yeah. And I saw the sewing pattern one and I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I love that you just use all kinds of different things that some people would be like, well, why would you use that? And why, like it's not stuff that's safe, and I love that. Like, it's like really just doing whatever you want to do with your
and there's work. So much raw material out there that we throw away. Like our society has gotten so much, like we were talking about, like fast fashion and just art. Like it's funny because I had somebody come through my studio space on Open Studio and she was like, oh, how much is for that one? And I don't know, like I don't have, a total price guide, and that's one thing I've started to have to look at, like, okay, how do you price your art? Yeah. And I was just threw a number out because I'm like, okay, this is how much time it took me, and I was like, $200. She's like, oh, well, I could buy something at Target for $200. Well, sweetie, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
Go to Target.
Yeah.
Buy something for $200. But there's such a throwaway mentality, and we have so much stuff out there. So like, I love like, okay, recycling stuff.
Yes.
Like I have a place where I go, I can get like wood and like build it out and make like canvas. Cause I'm like, okay, I could go spend $150 for this canvas, which is great.
Yeah.
But like, why not try to paint on something? And then I love like collaging stuff and taking other stuff and re-imaging it and sanding it down. That was funny thing is when we had our class in Art on 30th, Anne had this huge canvas and she took a sander to it. And I'm like, oh, you can sand a painting? Like I never would have thought to do that.
She's like, you could do anything you want.
And so like sanding it and getting the different texture. So like you know, paint it because it's acrylic. Like I work in acrylics and never dabbled really in oil just because it's so, like there's so much a long drying time that I like the quick, like, okay, you can paint something and
dry,
sand it down. And I'm such a perfectionist. I think moving from graphics design and then moving to painting, that's one thing I've had to release, which that's why I kind of gravitated towards abstract originally, is I can kind of like throw the paint around and be like, oh, okay. And I've noticed, and I have to watch myself. I'm like, oh, okay. It doesn't have to be perfect, Michael. This is not, you know, it's a painting. So.
Yeah. And I love that. Like I love rawness in any kind of, you know, like project where it's like sewing or it's like art or anything like that, because it's like, I feel like there's no like representation where like it's like the middle ground of things, you know, where it's like, look, there has to be like some kind of like evolution with things. So being able to see it like, hey, look, and obviously I feel like the social medias are like awesome in that sense where it's like you could go back and look at your stuff and be like, damn, I was doing some shitty ass work. Look at me now, you know. But it is like it's one of those
evolutionary process
where you see it and then you're like, oh well, and you start to see like the technique kind of change or it's inspired by something different, you know. And so I love that like now you're doing the portraits,
and
which is really cool.
Thanks. And
I
that's
love those
that, I was like wanted to challenge myself more because I was doing a lot of more abstract, and I was like, well, so much I wanted to move more not into realism because I just my artistic ability, and I think that's why I always did graphic design, because I'm like, okay, it's graphics, and I was never, I mean, I can draw, like I know if I did it more, which obviously now I've been doing more drawing, but it was a challenge thing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this and I'm going to draw it and see what it looks like and if I like it and incorporate it. So I've started doing that, which is kind of fun. And it's been a nice like surprise. I think if anything, I'm like, oh, okay, that doesn't look half bad. And that's my thing. I know I'm the worst critic of myself because I'll be like, oh, I don't like that. And I'll post something. Sometimes it's funny. I'll post something because I like to post, like you said, to see the evolution. And so I'll post something and I'll be like, damn, somebody actually likes that. Like, I just posted it because I wanted to see what I was doing for my process. You know,
like,
and I'll take a picture.
Really like it, huh?
And I'm like, oh, okay. But it's nice. And I've kind of learned from that of like, okay, I need to do that to hold myself accountable.
Yes.
Because I've gone through all my stuff and be like, oh, you know, why did I just abandon this? Like, oh, okay, like leave it by the wayside and let life get in the way. And like, oh, okay, no, keep doing it. So that's it. Like doing the portraits has been a fun way to kind of do it. And that's where I said it's funny. I've kind of been almost full circle, is because like I was noticing lately a friend of mine was working and they did zines, which cracks me up that it's coming full circle, because I think people, especially during COVID, have gotten more what people call, and I definitely see it as more analog, of like drawing and not doing the digital stuff. And so zines, which when I was in high school, I mean, before we had the advent of, you know, computers, that's how we would be creative. Like we'd make the little magazines. So I was like, oh, maybe I should get back into, you know, trying that. And it's just like, I had no idea. I started researching. I'm like, they have a whole like festival and like
it's coming up.
It's like crazy. Like, oh, wow. So it's funny how things, you know, come full circle. So doing that, I was like, oh, well, to kind of challenge myself and get more back in and bring more of my design skill set back. Like topography and layout and everything. So.
Oh, that's so fun. And you know what? It's like really, really utilizing like those skills that you've had, that you're like, well, I should kind of like mess around with that and see like what happens.
Because why not?
Because why not? Like, I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Like, nothing. Like, you're just going to make this really really cool, like, you know, piece of artwork, you know. But it's really interesting that like now you're in the art hub and like now you have like your space, and your space is like really beautiful and inviting. So you have like plants on like the, you know, your windowsill, and like you have like a window. A lot of the people don't have windows, and it makes it nice. That was
my big thing when Chris was renovating. I'm like, do you have anything that has a window? And he was awesome, because he was like, oh yeah, I have one space that's, you know, that I have, if you want to, you know, look at it. And he, you know, held it for me, and I was like waffling back and forth. Oh, do I really need this space? And it was probably the best decision, because it's, you know, like I said, it pushed me to, okay, you're investing in it, of like the money and the time, but just having the space of my own, of like, okay, I can go there. It's creative. I try to be really good, because I work remotely. Yeah. To not bring my work, because I could easily just be like, okay, you know, I'm going to come down at 8 o'clock in the morning and work. But I know myself, if I do that, I'll be like, oh, it's 7 o'clock, and I'm still doing my job and not being creative. Yeah. So that's where moving to that bigger studio has been good, because it allows me to have more space. Yeah, the window has been awesome, because that building get really hot during the
I heard
summertime.
I heard.
So having the space there and just the natural light, because that was the worst thing. Like my other studio, the first space, you know, it was very artificial, and then I'd bring a painting home, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, that looks totally than what I expected it to look like, because in the natural light, it's so much brighter. I'm like, whoa, okay.
You're like, what happened? That down a bit. That's why I put on makeup in natural light, because then you go outside and you're like, whoa, what happened?
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of eyeliner. But, you know, seriously, I love having you as a neighbor. Like, I feel like your energy is always like really awesome.
Oh, thanks.
And like, you know, I've always been like a huge fan of like your artwork, and I'm really excited that you're making inventory, you know, and like I feel because a lot of people, like even like just stickers and all that kind of stuff, like people just love that, you know.
And it's
amazing. And so what do you plan to do with like the space, and are you wanting to do more like gallery like stuff?
I think and it's been good from the fact that COVID, because before COVID happened, and people were like, oh, you need to do this and this, and it was a pressure like, okay, get into some shows and do that. And you know, right before COVID, I put a painting at a show at Art on 30th. You know, it was a juried show, and they had it there, and it was so funny, because first time I'd really entered a show, and people were like, oh, I love it, and people were talking to me, and then COVID happened, kind of sidelined it. So I've just been taking the time to really figure out, like, okay, and using the studio. Yeah. So now, one thing I'm working on is definitely getting a website, and kind of making and looking at it of like, okay, how to take that art and put it more out there for the masses. Because the one thing that always has driven me nuts about art is it's gotten so monetized, to the point of like, okay, yeah, I could sell a painting, I know how much it costs, but like somebody's not gonna, you know, be able to afford it, because when a person gets to a certain level, it's like, oh, okay, it costs that much. Not that I'm there, but what I see is like, oh yeah, somebody has to have $500 or $600. So trying to figure out a way of like, okay, making it so I can make art and it's affordable, but also accessible. Yes. So people can have it. That's why I like using recycled materials, because I don't feel bad. Like a friend of mine a few weeks ago was like, oh, I can't afford a piece of artwork. And I'm like, well, here, you can have this one. Like, what? You can have it. Like, because, okay, it was recycled stuff. I painted. I did it because I liked doing it. Yeah. And I want to be cognizant of that, because I've had, you know, last year, it was funny, during COVID, I was posting more stuff, because I was like, okay, just keep myself, you know, really accountable, I guess. Yeah. Like, okay, I'm going to the studio, and I did the 100-day project, which is the project where you do something for 100 days. Yeah. So I started, you know, the first day of the project, did almost 100 days, and literally like the last 30 days of it is when, hey, okay, we're moving Art Hub. And so I kind of like had to end it, but the accountability was good, because like every day I was posting stuff and the progress. But what was amazing, a gallery like approached me, which I never thought in 1,000 years like that would ever happen.
That's amazing.
But what was funny from it is they approached me, and they were talking about like how the whole gallery thing works, and like, oh, we have so much, we take so much, which I understand and I can respect it, because I have to make money. But I'm like, okay, so you want me to give you X amount of money to market it? Like, you just found me because I posted on Instagram, so I'll keep doing that. Because like one of my friends, like, they can't just go to a gallery and go pop it off the wall, because they're going to pay 25% on top of that price for them to get that. And we were talking back and forth like, well, what would you price this at? Oh, we price it at this much. Well, how much am I getting? oh, this much. So I could sell this directly to a friend of mine for that much money. Well, we're going to do that work for you. Where I'm like, okay, well, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm not doing art to make it to sell. I mean, like, all respect, there's like big artists out there that, you know, make lots of money, but it's become a product. It's like, is it art anymore, or is it a product?
Yeah. And I feel like exactly that same kind of way too, where it's like, for me, like, I love sewing.
Yeah.
I love sewing. Like, I love doing, like, cutting and doing, like, putting it together and doing that kind of process. I don't want to write descriptions of, like, the item or, like, try to sell it to you. Like, I'm not a salesperson, you know. I don't know what I am, but
you're the maker, and you want to.
I like that kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to be like, you need to buy it because it has, like, you know, this, and then you're just, you know. So for me, like, that's like what I like to do. Yeah. So it's like, I want for the story to be able to, like, sell it and like tell and people
to have a response to it. Like,
exactly.
For me, like, going, like, when I had the open studio, like, it was just a fluke, and it was like everybody was like, oh, we're gonna have this big thing because we're opening, you know, the art hub, and so I wanted to support it. And then people had reached out to me because I'd been posting, because I try to be really collaborative and, like, really share, especially because I look at it this way, as like, I came in to this neighborhood as a visitor, and it's been turned into, like, a second home. Like, as I come down here, it's like everybody is so welcoming and creative. Like, okay, everybody is working really hard, like, to make it, especially in the economy we're living now. It's like very touch and go. We never know what's going on day to day.
True.
But everybody here has been, like, so welcoming and supportive. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm here, and I'm going to make sure that people know. So it was funny, just from sharing that stuff, like, people started asking, oh, are you going to be open that weekend? I'm like, oh, I hadn't really planned on it.
Yeah.
Then I did it, and people are like, oh, wow, you should do that more, which definitely, you know, trying to have a full-time job and then do this, it's like, okay, you know, one goes the other. So holding the accountability of, like, having the studio space and doing it, and so trying to move into that next level, I guess you will, this next year.
Do you ever want to, like, would you ever want to do it as, like, a full-time thing, or?
Oh, yeah. If I could pay my bills and do it, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that's where I thought, like, with the 8x8 idea is coming from marketing, like, you know, brand, like, everybody's about, you know, like, having a brand and following it, and there is that loyalty of, like, people will follow it and they'll do it. Like you pivoted, and, you know, look at you, and, like, you're totally, I say this on camera, you're a total inspiration, because it's like you took it and took a time where it's like, it was very challenging, and people could have just been like, fuck this and give up, and you're like, no, this is what I'm going to do now. And
well, I think it was like the awakening, right? Like a lot of us had that kind of like waking up and just being like, whoa. To me, like, I've always kind of, like, seen it as like, well, I could always go back if I wanted, you know, but at the same time, I'm like, you know, I didn't realize how overly stressed I was, and how it was just a lot. And like, I was
and you don't realize how much it takes of your day.
Oh, it was like, and so for me, like, I was like, I loved this area because of, like, how much energy there was all the time. And I was like, oh my God, like, I want to be a part of that energy. And I never had any kind of inventory or anything. Like, I would just open up my studio. So people were like, oh, okay, cool. Like, when they would have art crawls and stuff. And so, you know, there was, like, a lot of time alone. So I was like, I'm just going to make stuff because I need to sew in order to not have a fucking shit attack, you know?
Well, and tune it. I think once you start doing that and you put yourself out there and you allow your creative headspace, you allow yourself to be in that creative headspace, you can't get out of it. Like, now, I used to be like, okay, I did this. Like, I walk away from it because I'm too focused on everything else. Where now my focus has changed of, like, I have a job, and I have that because I have to support myself, and I have my bills, and, you know, San Diego is not cheap. But, like, my space is, you know what, this is the time I'm working and not letting the stress of the job take away. Like, this week I'm off from work, and I'm like yesterday I just like, oh, this is so nice to just hang out and go to my studio all day.
Get used to it.
Yeah. So, like, I think what I would love to do is, like, take that brand and turn it to where I didn't want to just be Michael Woodward art. I wanted to be, like, 8x8. So that way, if I wanted to do something, like you and I chat about, like, you know, taking the art and putting it on stuff, but not just being like an artist where, oh, I print a shirt and it has my art, but like how to have like more of a dialogue. Like I talk to people like, hey, if I put my art on this, would you buy it? And they're like, yeah, but really building something where it's like, okay, like a messenger bag that has like, I started doing a couple of years ago, I had taken a lino cutting class, printmaking class over here
super
at
cool.
Bread and Salt.
Nice.
And really loved it because I had done that in high school. And so like I want to take like some of my lino cut stuff that I've been using in my paintings.
Yeah.
Because when I was doing the 100-day project last year, a lot of people were like, oh my God, I really love that. Because what I was doing is literally was creating something to then use it in the painting as an element, but taking that and putting it on stuff. Like somebody was like, oh, and I hadn't even thought of this. They're like, you should embroider that and put it on a hat. And I'm like, what?
You're like, great idea.
Yeah, I'm like,
do you have any more? You're like writing them down.
And I was like, oh, okay. And it was things like that I'm like, I didn't think of it from that angle because I've been such a space of like, okay, I'm just doing it for fun.
Yeah.
It's a stress reliever. To now being here and like walking through the neighborhood every weekend and being here and seeing people really do it, you know, like, okay, this is what they're doing every day. Like, oh, okay, maybe I could do that. So kind of seeing what I could go next.
Yeah. And you definitely can.
Yeah.
You know, because I feel like it just takes that little kind of like push, and then you've done it so many times where you like you're like, I'm gonna quit my job and I don't have anything lined up, and you know, and so
it is that big nest, jump out of the nest and be like, oh, what did I just do?
You're like, I'll fly, right? And like, but you know, it is one of those things where it's like sometimes it's like those little risks that you're just kind of like, oh well, I'm just gonna do that, and then you end up doing it.
And that support system too, like knowing like you can do it. And that's been the biggest thing for me is like doing it and like finally moving out of my yard. Like it was so funny. Like when I first came down here last year, I was there, and because it was COVID, everything was happening, I would come down and just shut the door. And then as things started to open up, people were getting vaccinated, and you like felt more like, okay, you know, opening it up, people were coming like, oh, wow, this is what you're doing in here. Because it was like, I wasn't always there. I was usually there in the evenings. Yeah. So it's been really great to have that community as well. And like that encouragement. Yeah. Like I was saying, you know, there's some of my neighbors who are like, you need to do this. Like, okay.
You're like, fine, I will do it. Like Jen, she's been like, oh yeah, you know.
She's awesome. Yeah. And she's been a good push. And she's like, I think the mother of our art studio. Hey, Jen, I'm talking about you.
Well, you know what? Like, I'm really so excited that you took time to like come and like just chit chat, because
it's been fun.
Seriously, like I think you're so amazing. Like I feel like your paintings like really like they called to me because I'm like, my brain looks like that. There's a lot going on.
Well, that's usually like my brain, because that's, you know, I just paint whatever like comes to me. Like, okay, I'm gonna just paint this today. Yeah. So,
and it's awesome, and I love it, and I've always loved your energy, and like I feel like you're such a great addition to like the hub, you know, and I know that there's like a lot of really awesome things to come for you, you know, so no, you're fine. You're fine. But yeah. Do you want to say who you are now? Because we did.
Sure. Do the introduction now.
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah. So Michael Woodward, and I am painter, artist, and I guess designer. Yeah. And sometimes of the day.
Yeah.
And I have my studio is called 8x8 Studio down here at the Art Hub.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for finally, like, I was like,
I know.
I was like telling Manny, we were in the car, and I was like, I'm gonna do like this happy freaking dance, and you know, because it was like, I seriously, like season 1, I was like, I really want to have Michael, and he's like, okay, and then all of a sudden,
hopefully
like,
did it justice. So
no, you're good. Thank you, and I appreciate you coming and taking time and all that. Yeah.
And there's so much work that goes into making this.
I know. Look at all these cameras, and I feel like paparazzi. Like, look at these lights.
Exactly.
You know? But thank you. I really appreciate you coming.
This is fun, and this is great. So
yeah.
Appreciate it.
Mic drop.